Look at what Snabbit is doing. What is Snabbit doing but attacking urban company, which is in a sense a millennial or I hate to use the word legacy, even though they are really successful and really short. But in a way, it's a brand that I use. It's a brand that my parents may use. Snabbit is coming and saying, we will take the Gen Zs away from here because we know how to speak to them. If you look at, say, Rahil spoke about Zepto. What Zepto is doing. Zepto just looked and said, okay, Blinkit, Instamart, we will hit Gen Zs. We will talk to them in Gen Z. We'll offer Gen Z values, right? And we will take them away. If you look at to some extent, and by the way, this is not just a startup thing. If you look at, say, Zudio, what is Zudio doing? Zudio is also taking away Gen Zs, right? By basically appealing to them, maybe on a combination of location, affordability, etc., etc.
So every few years, there will be a very specific kind of think piece that starts doing the rounds. About a decade ago, it was about millennials, how this was a lazy, narcissistic generation that had absolutely confounded marketers and brand builders, but how this was where the opportunity really lay. Now, in the last couple years, the same think piece has been doing the rounds with the same adjectives, but the generation has changed. Gen Zs. And here I should actually use the word we because I happen to be a card-carrying member of this generation, are believed to be lazy, narcissistic, chronically online, overly sensitive. I could keep going, but that's really not the point. The point is that it is the same think pieces that are doing the rounds with newer headlines, but this generation is truly fundamentally different. And I'm going to tell you why. Gen Z has actually done something that no previous generation has. They've changed who gets to be a brand. For the first time, a small digital-first brand can go up against a legacy giant without spending a single rupee on TV commercials or billboards or any of those things that once mattered. And they're not just taking on these brands, they are very often winning. That was something that millennials or boomers or anyone else really can't claim to have done. So for consumer brands today, Gen Z is becoming like the tip of the spear. And what I mean by that is you hook them early, you build the habit, and then you can then use them to crack the rest of the market wide open. There is, of course, a catch here, and I'm going to bring my co-host Praveen to explain what that is. PGK, you have written a fair bit about quick commerce, and there is a very fun word that you use to describe a lot of these platforms. And this has more to do with their origins. Do you know what that word is?
Sometime back when I wrote about Zepto, I called them a grocery startup, where I basically said that it's like this quick commerce company that is completely narrowly focused at quote unquote bros, which means that you basically went for use cases like these are people who want Diet Coke, cigarettes, and that is how they advertise themselves. This is not I said again and again, this is not a pejorative thing. I was not making fun of Zepto by saying that, oh, these are all just, completely useless and it's not going to work out. But this is how I describe them. But that being said, Rahil, I think the one thing that I completely disagree with you is that I was there when people wrote all those things about millennials, maybe like 10 years, 12 years back. I was also outraged as a millennial myself. And I see the same things happening with Gen Z today. And quite frankly, I don't really understand. I actually go back to the original point. I actually think that Gen Zs are not very different from millennials. It is just another generational thing is something that we love talking about. And I think that every brand that comes along comes in with a new story of, oh, we have cracked it. This generation is different. We are doing this. I don't know. I'm not particularly convinced. I feel like it's more or less the same thing and there's nothing particularly different here. But I guess that is why we have two guests here to help us figure out which side do they land on.
First, we have Adarsh Menon, who is a partner at Fireside Ventures. Now, this is a VC firm that bets on early-stage consumer brands here in India. Adarsh has also previously worked at Flipkart for close to a decade and Hindustan Unilever for even longer than that. Adarsh, when you look across Fireside's portfolio right now, right, we're talking about brands like Mamaearth, Boat, Underneath, Moxie, so many others. How much of their success would you actually credit to Gen Zs? Kind of comes back to what PGK was saying a little while ago.
So a fair amount of the success of many brands in our portfolio is actually because of Gen Zs, right? Because a lot of brands are built keeping this Gen Z audience in mind, and they're also able to do all the right things needed to market to them and to sell to them, right? So I think not just the brands that you mentioned, but several brands across the portfolio. By the way, not just across the Fireside portfolio, but several new age consumer brands in India are actually tasting a lot of success because of their ability to understand this audience, market to this audience, and basically do what is needed to stay ahead of what this consumer wants.
Fair. Adarsh, and just to kind of set things, to make things clear early on in the conversation, where on the side of things of this debate do you stand? PGK just said that Gen Z is just like any other kind of generation. We had the same conversation with millennials. It's the same thing all over again. Where would you stand in that debate?
So I must say, so my son is Gen Z, right? So he's almost 19. So he's actually pretty much like the average Gen Z, the median Gen Z age in India today. So I'm also hoping that in this conversation I get to learn more about him and more, and the things that he likes and what are some of the things that work with him. But to PGK's point, I actually disagree that Gen Z is just a young millennial. I think that's what PGK was saying, right? I don't think Gen Z is just a young millennial because Gen Zs are structurally different, right? And it's actually a lot to do with with what is called architecture, right? Now there is also this thing that every generation feels they are different, so there is a fair amount of generational hype that goes around. But in this case, the architecture is different because Gen Zs are digital first, like they didn't adopt the internet, right? They were born into it, so they are digital first. Their interest is community first. Their trust is peer first. So fundamentally, there are some architectural led sort of reasons why Gen Zs are not just young millennials.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about context. That's kind of what I meant, but others just put it way more eloquently than I did. So basically, Gen Z is two, millennials one. I want to bring our second guest in now. Our second guest today is Ajay Thandi. He is the co-founder of Sleepy Owl Coffee. Now, this is a brand that's been built on rewiring how young India drinks its coffee. Pretty much everyone has heard of Sleepy Owl. Ajay, you started Sleepy Owl when you were in your 20s yourself. So I'm guessing that you were making coffee for people who were like yourself, urban millennials. And of course, down the line, lots of Gen Zs kind of entered the mix. I'm curious whether that shift changed anything about how you build the brand, or whether goes back to PGK's point again, trying to figure out where you stand on this debate, whether you believe that a young urban online consumer is just a young urban online consumer, regardless of which generation they belong to.
Yeah, I agree with PJK, like Praveen, because I genuinely believe the difference between Gen Zs and millennials is honestly they just dress differently. That is all, right? The truth is that, like,
I, what do you mean by that is we dress better. That's what you mean.
yeah,
But
yeah, they
it's
go
okay. You
out in
can
night
continue.
suits, like hoodies and like loose, like pajamas. Like, I don't know, like they'll go to a bar or anything dressed like that. That's the only difference. Uh, like they're outspoken, they know their head on their shoulders, they're highly opinionated, but so were millennials, and they're informed. They You
Hmm.
cannot BS them. Uh, you know, pretty sure about themselves, and I think that is the generation. It will come off with age as well, because when I was growing up, the Zoomers and Boomers used to really trash on millennials, but I do believe our generation has been through the hardest time. Like, look at affordability. We can't even dream to buy a house in another 20 years. We can't dream to do what my parents took for granted when they were growing up. And I'm in my, mid 30s now, and I feel like, okay, wow, like my parents had it very easy and different. There was no competition. There was no real, like, availability and access also, but nor did it, so it changes, I guess, generation to generation. And that's just who they are. And I believe this is a very powerful generation from a perspective of where I think this is great is you cannot BS them around. They're fact checkers.
Hmm.
Like millennials could be, you can BS them, whether it was brands or it was politicians or anyone else. We did not have access to information on our palms the way people or the new generation does. So they're extremely authentic. And from a brand perspective, on Sleepy Owl's perspective, if we like we built the brand into our own image and into who we were as youngsters at that time, which was authentic, true, serve me what I want to and talk to me like an adult, don't BS me around, show me something and then sell me something else, like I don't matter. That has just translated, and Gen Z is extremely vocal about that. So that is the wake up call to any brand. You just cannot err on the side of caution when it comes to your consumers, and that's consumer education in today's day and age. And you see it from open source conversations happening by like independent authorities, like say Trustified, while debates on both sides of the aisle about them, but still they're out there speaking truth, and people follow them for, again, truth. So that is what that audience is. That is what that consumer is.
Let me just summarize the argument one more time, right? That I'm assuming that both sides are making. So if you talk about, when you come back to this topic, it's about Gen Z being the tip of the spear. And I'll explain my understanding of what that means. What that means is that the hypothesis is that currently, right now, what's happening is in sector after sector, in category after category, a lot of new startups and companies are looking at this and saying, the people who are market leaders over here are quote unquote millennial companies or legacy companies. I mean, I hate to bucket both together, but let's keep them together for now, right? They are this. So how do we now disrupt this? Hey, the way to disrupt this is we are not going to go and attack and try to steal away millennial customers or legacy customers. You know what we are going to do? We are going to go and attack just by taking away Gen Z customers from them, because these companies, which are fairly big and are extremely entrenched, do not understand Gen Zs at all. And because they don't understand Gen Zs at all, we will talk to them differently. We will communicate with them differently. We will have a slightly different positioning, and we will take those away first. So because, and the reason why we take them away is because Gen Zs by nature, and this is a hypothesis, are not loyal to anything. Just because, like for instance, I'll give examples. For instance, it's fair to say that, let's take I used to work at Myntra. I think it's fair to say that Myntra is a millennial brand. What I mean by millennial brand, it's a brand that came up and became popular because millennials started using it. And then slowly, of course, it expanded out, right? Now, if you look at today, what's happening, look at all the Gen Z brands that are out there that are starting to quote unquote attack and take away share. Look at what Snabbit is doing. What is Snabbit doing but attacking urban company, which is in a sense a millennial or I hate to use the word legacy, even though they are really successful, it's really short. But in a way, it's a brand that I use. It's a brand that my parents may use. Snabbit is coming and saying, we will take the Gen Zs away from here because we know how to speak to them. If you look at, say, Rahil spoke about Zepto. What Zepto is doing? Zepto just looked and said, okay, Blinkit, Instamart, we will hit Gen Zs. We will talk to them in Gen Z. We'll offer Gen Z values, right? And we will take them away. If you look at, to some extent, and by the way, this is not just a startup thing. If you look at, say, Zudio, what is Zudio doing? Zudio is also taking away Gen Zs, right? By basically appealing to them, maybe on a combination of location, affordability, etc., etc. So the point being that the reason why Gen Zs become the tip of the spear is because in some sense, they are the ones who are most loosely attached to everything else. And if you can steal them away because they are the most vulnerable ones and not really beholden to what everyone else uses. And you look at this categories after category, food delivery, like say someone like say Swish, groceries. If you look at say fashion, if you look at say home services. So companies are coming and taking away Gen Zs away and using that as a wedge to break out and try to get the rest of the market. Point one, they're not loyal. That's an assumption. They're not loyal to older things. Just because I use, like people like us, we use Google Pay and Paytm or Phone Pay for such a long time. But these are all quote unquote millennial brands. I don't know how many new kids will start using this. So I'm sure UPI apps will try to attack them and take them away. Look at examples like Pop, etc., who are trying something similar. So that's really the argument, that is now a strategy. The reason why I am disagreeing is because I'm saying, look, this is just another version and variant of what used to happen like 10-15 years ago when you had all of these startups that came in and companies that came in. I don't use the same brands that my parents do, and the Gen Zs are not going to use the same brands as I do. So what is fundamentally different here? So that's really the central point of this argument.
Yeah. See, the point is that some of this is some of this is the reality of any consumer brand, right? That you will always have, and in a market like India, which is so diverse and so dynamic, right, and so heterogeneous, you will always have some cohort or the other that becomes more important at different points in time, right? And then as a brand or as a platform, you have to change the way you come across to your overall cohort so that you're able to stay relevant, right? So I think that is true of anything in life, or certainly anybody doing business in India at a national scale, right? So I think that is what has happened with all of these brands and all of these platforms, which is every passing year there are more Gen Z people who enter as being financially independent, right? And as they start spending more money, the nature of how they process information and the nature of how they decide what brands to buy and the nature of how they shop on platforms changes, right? So I think that is pretty much it. It doesn't, I don't think one needs to overdiagnose this point. To me, one big difference, and I think this goes back to platforms specifically, is brands today have to realize, or platforms have to realize, that the way consumers discover them, 20 years back or 15 years back, it used to be on retail shelves, right? Maybe 5 years back, it used to be on Google, right? Or on search bars. Today, it is actually on algorithms, right? So what is called distribution in like 2 decades, excellence in distribution have shifted from retail presence availability to algorithm availability, right? To feed availability, right? So I think brands and platforms have to realize that this shift has happened in the way people are processing information, and just change accordingly. That's about it. In fact, I would say, we keep talking of Gen Zs. Like, the reality is there are so many of them. It's almost 1 in 4 Indians, right? It's fairly sort of naive to assume that Gen Z in India is one cohort, because even within the Gen Z cohort, the Gen Z who is in India one, from a well-to-do family, and a Gen Z who is India three from a lower middle class family, certainly is not the same, right? So ultimately, it's about, at the end of the day, it always comes down to how do you understand how your consumer base is shifting, is changing, and how you're constantly able to keep up pace with that.
So, Adarsh, you said something about algorithms just now, which is interesting, right? I feel like there's a big shift from, say, 2016, which coincidentally is around the time that both Sleepy Owl and Fireside kind of started out. When there was this huge opportunity for digital, digital brands and all of that, and right now being algorithm dependent is probably the biggest kind of like red flag, I would think, right, from a brand standpoint. So how do you kind of pull out of that? Like, what is the alternative? I'm sure brands are thinking about, like, kind of maturing beyond that. How do you kind of think about that?
See, the reality is that that is how people are discovering brands, right? The difference between earlier, it used to be, you run an ad on TV, or you run an ad on, XYZ channel, you put up a hoarding, then you have inventory in stores and people would buy, or you have inventory on, Flipkart and Amazon, people would buy, right? Today, that it's changed to a large extent to content, commerce, all coming together. Um, Gen Z certainly don't search as much as scroll, right? So it is a lot of feed-based discovery and feed-based sort of choice that people are making. So whether brands like it or not, they have to be able to master that algorithm. And the way to master it, by the way, again, it's not rocket science, right? It's a point that Ajay had made earlier, that you have to stay authentic to be able to get that share of mind. You have to have authentic communication, relatable, personalized communication to get you, to win that bottom of the funnel. And at the end of it, your product has to deliver, right? You can do all of this. If your product doesn't deliver, you're not going to get repeats.
Ajay, can I bring you in here? Do you have, what's your kind of, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, see, my view is a little different. While I think others speaks about uh, you know awareness and creating that scale. When I think of brand, I think of that conversation comes into play at 1 to 10, but 0 to 1 journey, to be very honest with you, is very, very old school, and it's been done for from the day brands were created, which is and it doesn't go out of fashion, in my view, having gone through all the cycles and tried to chase all the trends. which is, you have to, in the early days, do things which don't scale, and which goes back to the point of authenticity. Your first 1,000 customers, speaking to them, knowing them, understanding their habits, what their kids are like, why they consume your product, when they consume it, what are the other products. These things cannot be caught and done through any algorithm or through, you know, uh, uh, brand studies and so on and so forth. And that is where true authenticity and character of a brand is a human being. In the same way, like a human to be built has to go through school. You want to build a body, you have to go through years of training. You want to educate yourself, you have to go through, become a doctor, you have to go through years of rigor to achieve that eventually, where people will respect you for an opinion, right, of any kind. That is what a brand is also. It is a human being, same way it has to be nurtured, cared for, and more real you are about that journey, the more inelastic it will be, the more stronger the moat will be, the more pricing power. As Buffett talks about, brand is in essence what, like pricing power, right? Like you go through a q-commerce or an e-commerce and this wave or that wave, but your ability to, wars happening, input costs going on, your ability to keep up pricing, that is brand, right? And that is built through years and years of toil that goes into that. Honestly what we've experienced. Everything else is, comes and goes and is very superfluous in nature, in my extremely humble opinion.
So sorry, Ajay. I'm just going to push you on that. If you're basically saying that, oh, the only thing that matters are the old classic rules, then by
Yeah,
that logic, then none of these legacy brands, and these legacy brands have nothing to fear because they have been around for such a long time. They have
yeah,
built
but
their business over such a long time.
they lost their authenticity to it, right? And it became about, uh I feel, about the next quarter and pushing things through. Like, I think you should talk to legacy brands how their incentives are structured. You want to know how brands are, anything you want to know how it's run in the world, is go and look at the incentive of the person running it. He's trying to
Hmm.
push a number at the end of the quarter or the quarter after. Whereas, go back to the founder who built and created the product. Was he ingredient first, or was it 10 years later corporate CEO said, okay, you know what, screw the label, let's go down to beating it down to the replace sugar with corn syrup and all that. Like, when you study it, you realize you're still milking what the guy started. But in essence, over the years, not to talk about, but the professionals, because they're running by metrics and numbers, have become that, and then they know how to paint it in very beautiful language and beautiful archetype, which now is being called out. That is the honest truth.
But how do you stand out, really stand out as a brand then? Because now we've reached a point where authenticity and honesty is kind of table stakes, right? Like
Hygiene, yeah.
everyone, it's hygiene, right?
Okay, while it's hygiene, but I'll tell you what, like, it is hard to do. Like, everyone knows investing is what is investing. You buy good companies with a margin of, say, let's talk about very simple, right? Margin of, say, Warren Buffett, greatest investor out there. He's gone and written books about how to invest and how he's done it over 60 years, beaten the market and achieved that 20% plus return. Not everyone can do it. There's no secrets out there. Every playbook is done to death, and today's day and age, it's information is out there for you, for those who seek. The difference is who's actually able to drive it, and with discipline, day in day out, and show up regardless of what the circumstances are. Is
Okay, let me just make this more specific. So, suppose, for instance, Adarsh, and this is, I'll start with you, Adarsh, right? So, let's say, for instance, I come in hypothetically as a startup or a wannabe startup, right? And I come and tell you, and I say, I'm asking to put your VC hat on, right? And I say, here is this category, or here is this vertical. It is run by a bunch of brands. They're all very powerful brands, etc. I think that I'm going to go back to the original premise. I believe that Gen Z is the tip of the spear. I'm going to take away Gen Z customers in this because they are not anyway, they aren't loyal, they aren't habit forming, they aren't this thing, etc., etc. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be authentic. Now, I think there are two parts to this. Part one is what else is there beyond authenticity? Fine, we can talk about, oh, you need to basically think long term. Fine, we understand all of those things, but what else is there in me as a company that I need to do in order to execute this strategy? And I'm using examples that I already shared earlier, which is like, we're not necessarily saying that all of these have succeeded, but I feel like that was a broad strategy. If you look at, say, a Zepto or a Snabbit or a Pronto or, all of these other companies. So I feel like that's the broad template. And I think, number one, what are you looking for in me? What advice would you give me as a company? And second part, of course, is I would love for you to, counter or agree with me on, hey, the reason I'm taking Gen Zs away is because they're not loyal.
Mhm. I'll come to the latter one, the latter part of the question later, because I think it's a
Okay.
very easy and convenient, sort of narrative that's going around. But the
Okay.
former one is, I'll come straight to that first, right? So
Hmm.
if a company or if a founder comes and tells us that, I'm building a business which is going to take
Hmm.
away Gen Zs from legacy, right?
Correct.
I think that's a very wrong way for the founder to think about building a business,
Oh,
right?
really?
Because ultimately businesses are built, when they have strong consumer insight, executed very well, and good amount of money in the value chain to keep executing that day in and day out, right? That's ultimately at the end of it, that's what builds strong businesses. And of course, agility to stay ahead of what's happening with consumer trends and, always staying relevant. Now, first of all, this hypothetical fictitious, sort of business, um, first thing to check is the core proposition of what they're building. Who is that proposition relevant for, right? If they
Hmm.
are building a business, I'll make an extreme example for seniors, and then saying, I'm going to steal Gen Z customers, that doesn't make sense, right? But if they're going to
Sure.
build a business, let's say for young millennials or millennials in general, and they are very confident that the proposition will extend downwards into, Gen Z's age wise, downwards into Gen Z's, and they can get that sort of, business coming their way or that audience coming their way. Yeah, that's a good sort of starting point, right? Now, on top of that, what we'll certainly check is how are they going about building it, right? Are they doing what is hygiene, which, by the way, to Ajay's point, is not something you can take for granted.
Hmm.
B, are they building strong moats, not just for their Gen Z cohort, but also for their millennial cohort, right? And see, how are they building leverage in their business, right? How are they able to leverage what they've already built in terms of capabilities, cost they've incurred, all of those things. So I think the yardstick to evaluate a company is not very different, right? It's the same irrespective of what they're building. You look at hygiene, you look at moats, you look at leverage, you look at whether they're doing, whether they have deep consumer understanding, money in the value chain, all of those things, right? Now, in again, going back to this particular example, if their entire premise is that they will keep sort of they'll keep getting Gen Z consumers, new Gen Z consumers into their family, keep
Hmm.
churning those consumers, and keep treating the millennial consumers as, let's say, the second rung of citizens in their sort of family. That is
Hmm.
certainly not a good thesis to start with, right? That's, in fact,
Hmm.
I think that's a terrible business to build, right?
Why?
Because let's not forget, Gen Zs, while they're a large part of the consumption story, they're not 100% of it, right? There
Hmm.
are still many, 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 many consumers out there who are not Gen Z, who will never be Gen Z, and who, by the way, might behave very differently from the way Gen Zs are, right? So
Hmm.
so as a business, you have to be very clear who is your core customer, right? Now, that core customer could be Gen Z, it could be millennial, right? And how do you manage to stay relevant with all of them? And if you're going to build a if you're going to build a business on the basic thesis of customers will come and customers will go, customers will go, customers will go, then that's a business which will always have very high CAC, which will have very low LTV, and hence a business that should not be built in the first place. Forget being invested in, right? So why would you want to run a business like that?
Got it. I understand what you're saying. Ajay, I'm just going to ask you the same similar question. And this is just actually slightly different. Like, as a founder of a brand like, Infos like Sleepy Owl, like one of the things that like we talk about internally at the Ken is we wonder at some point we keep asking ourselves, look, we know what we're doing, we know who our core subscriber is. And we wonder, like, and the nightmare scenario is somebody wakes up someday and realizes that, oh, you know what, I can take the Ken is no longer, it does not speak to the Gen Z customers, which I hope is not true, but it does not speak to the Gen Z customers. And here we understand that much better. So here's what we are going to do. We are going to steal away their Gen Z customers by doing something, whatever, a combination of whatever we discuss, authenticity, etc., etc. Is there a defensive strategy? Is there something you can do? Do you worry about that? Is that something you think about?
That if our product speaks to a new customer or not.
Yeah, whether they try to take away Sleepy Owl's Gen Z customers by, you know, doing something that is in your blind spot, just like it could be anyone's blind spot. Do you worry about that? Is there anything you think about in that sense? This kind of a strategy being executed on you?
There, uh, again, we like to like for us when we started the company, it was
Hmm.
we saw that there was a gap in the market from a product and positioning perspective, and there was this legacy brands which were not speaking to the new age consumer that was coming about
Hmm.
into the
Sorry, for
coffee
the record, I
space,
must say that I
right?
discovered Sleepy Owl through the work that you had done on your really, really wonderful ads on Instagram, etc. So,
Yeah,
which is again, as others said, algorithmic discovery. That's how I discovered
yeah.
Sleepy Owl, and it definitely like stayed
But
with me.
even
I
I'll
remember
tell
that.
you the content probably that got discovered by you,
Hmm.
it stood out because it was very different, and it was always very different, and we got spoken to. A lot of brands spoke to us, and I'll tell you, Sleepy Owl's problem was always and continues to be our brand and our discovery and a top of funnel awareness is much larger than the scale of our business. And why is that the case? Because from day one, none of us are marketers. My
Hmm.
co-founders are two lawyers and I'm a ex-banker, and we truly just seriously we didn't read, we didn't get educated in the FMCG consumer landscape at all. We didn't know any rules, and we did everything in house. So when we put content out, it was truly to ourselves, people and of our generation, which we felt were not being treated well by legacy brands, and that was the gap we identified. And
Hmm.
that was the positioning, the brand design, the architecture has been structured from that lens where we felt, then goes into where we felt certain legacy brands, the tones and the archetype, how we wanted it to be. And the second aspect of it, which truly matters, right, is that part can be good that okay, someone will see the brand in an aisle. At that time, it was an aisle because digital was not as ubiquitous as it is today. That they'll at least give it a second look and come pick it up. But we truly knew that you can pick it up, but business won't be built to Darsh's point on that first pickup. It is about that customer coming back again and again, and that is the product inside, and that is where authenticity comes. What you say has to be, you have to be truly, truly honest about about yourself, and that will ensure that you survive long enough. Copycats will come, they will go, but if you're truly authentic, it will stick out to the customer. A customer will be flirtatious, and they should be, because they're eventually the burden of choice is on the consumer, and it's a free economy. Everyone can come and start a brand, but authenticity leads them back to and translates into loyalty, I believe, in the long run, and we've experienced that. And
Do you worry
to
of a insurgent strategy like this? Like somebody basically waking up and saying,
no,
let's
my
take.
worry is that if I lose my soul and I'm not authentic to what I claim to be, I will. That is my worry. If
Hmm.
someone comes in and searches me and says that, hey, I have, then I will say maybe I've missed on this part of the brand and they've done something really cool. Can I take a stab at it? I will go and do it. But if it is something which is missing in my arsenal or because of inauthentic claims that I lose a customer, then I will be worried. And those things, of course, that is why my quality, my product, my sourcing are very, very key and authentic to me, where I spend a lot of my time. Now, to your final point of new age trends and things that come about, maybe in 10 years we might require a repositioning exercise. But that's how brands evolve over time. Like Coke has done it every 2 decades. They do it. Pepsi does it, but they still the taste of Coke remains the same. They
Hmm.
reposition it. They speak to that audience where they realize, okay, you know what, that logo architect, and guess what, retro becomes cool, and now Pepsi's logo is back to what it was in the 70s. So that is just the nature of the brand business that we are in, and we should not shy away from it. But the core is what the core that customer comes back to you is for the product, what you serve, what your your what benefit you're bringing to them, and I think sticking to that is what has worked so far. and rest we'll see as the time, how we evolve.
I find the repositioning point very interesting. What you're
Yeah,
really saying is that even if you're a legacy brand or a millennial brand or whatever you want to call it, and if this kind of a strategy always exists for people to come and try to take away Gen Zs for whatever reasons,
yeah,
you have an option. I mean, of course, it starts like everything else in life, recognizing and being aware that this is happening.
yeah,
And then you're saying that there is this repositioning. You gave the example of
yeah.
Pepsi. Adarsh, I heard you agree. Is this something that you see, you talk about, you understand?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many branding examples. You think of Crocs, like a brand which was dead 10 years ago. Now every kid wants to wear it. You think of Stanley Cup, like again, every millennial Gen Z girl in my gym carries it. It was again so many brands such as that have come and they get revived, they go
I,
stale,
I,
but that
I
is
will say, sorry, I will say that at the Ken's office, there are a couple of Gen Zs who have, I don't know if they have Stanleys or Stanley knockoffs, but it's
but
just very
No,
they
no,
similar.
no,
look
not
alike. You know
Stan.
what I'm talking about.
The new Stanley is the Ovala,
Oh,
guys.
okay,
You need
fine. There is
to.
more. See, this is what I mean. This is the insurgent. Sorry,
Yeah.
go on, please. Continue,
I
Ajay.
mean, I mean that happens. That is creative destruction. It's such a beautiful process. Like brands rediscover themselves, they come back. I mean, the instant photos. Like it just became like it was a thing in the 90s, and then suddenly it was dead. And 10 years ago, it's suddenly millennial thing, right? Like suddenly everyone had instant cameras and Polaroids everywhere, and we grew up hearing about Polaroid story that he inspired Steve Jobs, but there were no Polaroid cameras around except for I would find it in my parents' cupboard. And suddenly it made a comeback in 2010. It is relevance, rediscovery. That is the story of a brand. That will continue to happen. It has happened so many. There's so many stories out there, and there's like I mean, Unilever had so you were part of the brand. There's so many there that you can share some anecdotes with us as well.
Yeah, certainly. See, reinventing is essential for any brand that is doing business in India, right? And I'm sure if you're in the US or Europe, it's not as sort of time critical as this because our markets are very dynamic, right? And our markets parallel process many things and things move very fast, right? So reinventing is very important, though I will say over here that reinventing is not the same as resetting, right? Because if you're a legacy brand and let's say a brand, the legacy, of course, is very subjective, but let's say a brand that has got its center of density on with millennials, right?
Hmm.
And now there are Gen Z audiences that are coming up, so you know that you have to sort of reinvent, right? I think as a brand, you have to be very clear as to what do you hold on to, which are your strengths, right? And what do you change, which can make you, which if you don't change, will lead you to losing relevance. So
Absolutely.
the strength identification is extremely important. It doesn't mean that overnight you just try to become something that you're not, right? Typically, brands which have been around for longer are brands that have very strong distribution moats, are brands which have very high supply chain sort of capabilities, deep operational expertise, much better processes running in the back end, which lead to better wastages, all the boring stuff, right? So brands that have been around for longer have all of these. It's important that they retain this, right? Because
Hmm.
I think they are strengths in their arsenal that can help them compete and reinvent themselves faster, right? But it's also important that they reinvent, which is they need to probably understand that the playbook for them to talk to the new consumers who are entering their sort of TG, that is different. Maybe they need to modernize some visual identity. Maybe they need to have a separate SKU line which is different, which could be more trendy, limited edition, because we are seeing that Gen Zs certainly want stuff which is available today but may not be available tomorrow, or available only with them but not available with somebody else. So some of these things, in some cases, they might also need to have a small mini organization within their larger organizations, which is more scrappy in nature, does things faster, churns things out faster. So I think the reinventing is certainly essential, but it does not mean that they have to fully reset. Because I do believe that in India, everybody can win, given the size of our market and the fact that every cohort is actually growing. But it's important how you prepare yourself to win.
Any examples in India that you can think of that have basically done this fairly well?
So brand examples you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
See, most of the, I would say, most successful consumer brands do end up doing this, right? And in that, what I mean is it's not necessarily only for Gen Z consumers, but it's actually for consumers that they believe are not shopping them today, but will start shopping them tomorrow,
Hmm.
right? And then they're able to mold their internal practices and basically fit to compete with that new with that market much better and change their processes internally much better.
Others, in fact, I think I've seen that play out with Terra Active, which is a brand
Hmm.
that I realized recently is part of the Fireside portfolio as well. Again, a brand
Yes.
that I discovered entirely online. One of the earlier kind of brands to really like athleisure brands to and specifically catering to a Gen Z audience to really like make it online and kind of go viral. I'm guessing that the core product for them would be this cuddle tea that you keep seeing kind of
Yes.
them
Yes.
push excessively, and then everything else on the fringe is like stuff that you'll also see a bunch of other athleisure brands that have popped up in the recent past, like Kava and all of those kind of catering to a similar market, similar kind of lineup of products. Those keep changing, so there'll be a pair of shorts, whatever, running skirt, blah blah blah. But the core product will be that tea. Is that kind of what?
Yeah. Except, some positive bias towards Terraactive. The cuddle tea is not pushed excessively; it is pulled
Mm,
excessively by consumers, right? So yes, but something like that, right? So you need to have
mm,
the core very strong, and that is like I would say that is ABCD of running a business,
mm.
right? You need to have that predictable demand, predictable supply chain that keeps your core, absolutely solid and stable, and so that you're able to do things on the fringe to get to talk to this customer repeatedly, who could be trend driven, who could be fad driven, who today could want something, tomorrow could want something else. But I would say that is not very different from how business would have operated 20 years back. It just necessitates the need to do this now.
I'm
Hmm.
curious then why you say that Gen Zs are like our assumption that Gen Zs are fickle and not loyal. Why you disagree with that?
Yeah, I guess
Yeah,
we have
see,
to
I
come
think
to the heart of that. Go on. We have reached there now, that part of the podcast.
no, I think it's a very lazy and a very convenient narrative, right?
Hmm.
And I've heard two, three things. I've heard that Gen Z is disloyal. I've heard that Gen Zs have, low attention span, right? I think, again, like I'm saying, I think it's a lazy and convenient narrative. I don't think Gen Z is disloyal. See, they are, for whatever reason, good reason, they are overserved in the sense that they have multiple choices in front of them, right? There are new brands that are getting built for them. There are platforms that are delivering those brands to them in 10 minutes, right? Those platforms are phenomenally easy to operate in the sense that it's all online. The UX is very mobile friendly. Payment is on UPI. There are easy returns, right? So it's a it's a it's a generation that is growing up with a lot of brand choice. Number one, and number two, there is very limited cost of actually switching between brands, right? So I don't think it is disloyal. I just think they are overserved. And secondly, and I like this about the way this cohort operates, is that they have very low tolerance for brands that don't deliver what they said they will deliver, or brands that operate with opaque marketing or over claiming of marketing stories. So I think that tolerance towards any of these things is very low, which means they are quite rational in the way they exercise brand choices. And I like that. They put that pressure back on brands to be authentic and to consistently deliver what they said they will deliver. That's the
Hmm.
second thing. The third thing is this, allegation that their attention span is very low. Now, if that were the case, podcasts, and obviously we're in one of them, podcasts as a means of people to talk would not exist, right? Now Gen Z's listen to podcasts, they listen to long podcasts, and obviously they require attention. They are binge watching series all the time, which obviously means that they don't have an attention problem. I think what they have is a lot of lack of toleration for irrelevant stuff,
Hmm.
right? So if you're not relevant, and I think the window to win that relevance or irrelevance is a very short window with them. If you lose that window, then you're gone, right?
Hmm.
But if you win that window, I do believe that they stay fairly committed to the conversation and committed to the to the engagement that you have with them.
Yeah, I'll just say that Adarsh is far too modest because I did read, because Fireside Ventures actually put out a report on this. It's called The Indian Consumer at 2030. And I just want to, and he's not spoken about that directly, but I'll just call it out because I read this today morning before this conversation. There are two things that really struck me in this report. Very nice stuff. One of them is that you call them Gen Z, we call them the reverse generation. Now,
Hmm.
what he basically wrote is that they influence their parents, they don't get influenced by them. They shop like
Hmm.
millennials, they don't pay like them. They follow
Hmm.
celebrities on social, they don't idolize them. Okay, third one is I have I'll debate that, but whatever. Fourth one, want the latest, don't want the greatest. I get it.
Right.
Now, along with that, just earlier in this conversation, along to both Ajay and to Adarsh, I was asking these questions, like, can you basically like attack certain kinds of categories, basically by appealing to Gen Zs or being Gen Z first, so to speak. Turns out
Hmm.
that Fireside actually has a list of 15 what they call opportunities to build big brands. And I'm telling you what those 15 are. I'm not going to read out the whole thing. I'll read some of them. It says that you're a white spaces for founders to build category defining businesses, hyper personalized, community powered, embedded in the daily lives of digital natives. Here are some of the themes. I think some of them I'm just reading out. Ready to cook and to eat spices, mixes, and meals. International cuisine in India. New age desserts, chocolate, and mithai. All in one fashion platform for Gen Z. Clean, delicious, functional beverages. Authentic fragrances. Cosmetic brands. Jewelry. Regional snacks. Organized retail for Bharat Gen Z. Men's hair and personal care and style. Again, Rahil, athleisure. And of
Hmm.
course, fun and hip protein snacks. Ajay, you'll be thrilled
Hmm.
to know that coffee is nowhere on the list. So thank God. I think we are okay. So,
Thank you.
okay. And neither is subscription business journalism. So I guess we are safe for now. Okay. But I just want to say that, I mean, again, I'll just ask Kadesh, why these particular categories? These are all white spaces that you discovered, obviously. But is there something that you want to double click on and flesh on these categories?
I think first of all, given that the two categories you mentioned are not there on the list, I'm happy we are doing this virtually and not in person. So
Fair.
we actually went and studied a ton of Gen Z consumers across
Hmm.
the length and breadth of India, right? And we tried to simulate what their wallet looks like today and what their wallet will look like tomorrow, right? And this was an interesting study because half the Gen Zs actually are not economically independent today, and the other half have become economically independent. Some of them also becoming new parents. So very expressive about what they want and where they spend and so on, right? So it is an interesting study. It's a mixed cohort today, right? So these were bases how we thought their lives, lifestyles, preferences, etc. would evolve. We thought these are the categories which are under indexed today, which could become large tomorrow. Not to say
Hmm.
that there are categories which are the many categories on this list are, by the way, large today and will continue remaining large tomorrow,
Hmm.
right? So I think these were just, I would say, more of white spaces as compared to just large wallet share categories. That's how this came across. And I'll tell you one more thing very interestingly, that came in the study is that you know uh, that there was a it's a dichotomy in the way Gen Zs behave, right? Like they will be extremely value conscious and almost I would say penny pinch to the extent where they can. So if it's a Netflix subscription, right, which costs a couple of $100, four of them will share it so that they don't end up spending money. But if there is a new sneaker drop for $8,000 that they can relate to, they'll very quickly go and buy it. I think Rahel
Yeah,
is
my
laughing. I
college
think that
roommates still use my Netflix account. So
yeah, there
it's
you go. And
frustrating.
I'm sure you would have bought one of those limited drop sneakers as well for like $8,000, right?
Can't
so, so see
confirm,
that's
not deny.
so. So see that's a and there's the same person, by the way. This is not different people within the Gen Z cohort. And the other thing, which is I think is slightly different with Gen Zs as compared to millennials, to the first discussion that we were having, is that they are actually not upward aspirational, right? As much as what millennials were, but they were very sideward identifying. So that sense of this is my community and these are people that I relate to, and not necessarily people I aspire to be. That is very, very strong in Gen Zs compared to millennials. Like certainly, like clearly when I was growing up and when I started working, a lot of things that defined choices for me were people who I look up to, right?
Right.
And I wanted to be a lot like them, and obviously they were role models. I think for Gen Zs, and I think this is a point of view we have, which may or may not be true. I think for Gen Zs, a lot of role models are actually sideways as compared to upwards, right? And hence a lot of categories also that you spoke about. Maybe the best way to build them is not by having known faces advertise them, but by actually having relatable role models advertise them and talk about them. So, interesting way of building business here at the end of the day. See, many of the successful new age brands today, right? They have a percentage of Gen Zs in their consumer base. They also have a percentage of millennials in their consumer base, right? The reality is that if you have X amount or a good amount of Gen Zs in your consumer base, you actually attract both millennials and Gen Xs, right? It's never the other way
Mm.
around, right? So a brand which has some Gen Z footprint will attract millennials and will attract Gen Xs, never the other way around, right? So that is a great opportunity for a brand as well. So if a brand is able to, I would say, hook in Gen Z consumers and understand a way to also get LTV through them, right? Not the example
Mm.
that PG gave of that fictitious company where Gen Zs are coming and churning, not that, right? But if you're able to bring in Gen Zs into your consumer base, and if you're able to find ways to figure out how to get LTV out of them, right? How do you build those cultural
Mm.
halos? How do you get loyalty? How do you build good unit economics? All of those things, right? Product that delivers. Actually, I feel your brand will keep getting healthier and healthier with time, because Gen Zs will be like a magnet to bring other older consumers into the brand franchise.
I guess it's because at some level everybody has a feeling and an aspiration to be younger.
Younger.
Absolutely.
Nobody has a feeling or an aspiration to be older, you
Absolutely
know?
right. Absolutely. 100% correct.
So in summary, you should target the Gen Zs and the older folks with a little midlife crisis. That is the sweet spot.
Others, can you explain how role models are sideways, not upwards? What do you mean by sideways?
We found Gen Z audiences that we spoke to, and by the way, this is true. A lot of our brands also tell us this, right? That they are not really upwardly aspirational, in the sense for them the somebody who they aspire to be need not be a superior at work, or like a relative who's doing very well. I think these were the codes clearly for the previous generation in many ways, right? At least the people that we spoke to, they don't seem to be coming across as the codes. For them, it is a lot more. It's a lot more. I relate to this person. Now, this person could be at my level. He could actually be a peer. He could actually be a classmate. And I want to be like him. He works out, so I want to be like him. She is able to balance sport and academics. I want to be like her. It's more that as compared to he or she is, previous generation doing so much better and has a big car and a big house, right? So I think the aspiration set has become more sidewards as compared to upwards. And the other thing, which was the second part, was that they clearly, I think, the effectiveness of having big celebrities advertise your brands, while that was a sure shot recipe for success, 10 years back, clearly
Mm.
not a recipe for success anymore. It's
Interesting
more
that you say
relatable
that,
people.
Adarsh. I was actually speaking to Ajay about this just a couple days ago. And
Hmm.
there's still massive popularity of celebrity grown brands that cater specifically to Gen Zs, right? Like in India itself, there's Underneath, which is part of your portfolio as well. There's in the US, there's of course Rare Beauty. There's massive success, Fenty Beauty. There are so many kind of in that beauty and that space. How would you explain that then?
In India, I think like the best example that I was talking to you about in recent times to me is Super You, but it just goes like hand in glove, like the whole execution of the go-to market from a brand perspective. It feels authentic that Ranveer, what he's saying, is actually consuming that product. But
Hmm.
the muscle behind is actually the operators and the business that has been able to execute and achieve that GTM and growth in such a short period of time. So I think that the rules of just getting a earlier days you had money, get brand ambassador, it will give you awareness, has changed massively to find authenticity again, going back to that word of being authentic and being true. Others, I don't know if you agree with this
100%.
viewpoint.
100%. 100% agree with you. Underneath is a great example. It's a success story. Touchwood. I think it's also because while Kusha is the face of the brand, I think people also relate to her story and all the messages that she has put out over the years,
Yeah.
right? And people relate to that. See, just like underneath is a successful brand, celebrity run with the face of a celebrity, there are several celebrity run or celebrity face brands in India that have also failed, right? Because I do
More have failed than have
Yeah.
succeeded, by the way.
more absolutely 100% right. And by the way, those celebrities in like till very recently and maybe even today are very bankable faces, very bankable faces, right? But those brands have not succeeded
Yeah.
because shoppers and consumers have not felt that authenticity and that
Connect.
link
Yeah.
between what the face of the brand is and what the brand stands for, right? And by the way, what they need as well. So I think the aspect of relatability is very important. The other word, which I don't think we've used today, which is very important for Gen Z, and by the way, it doesn't mean that it's not important for seniors or for Gen X's, right? But I think for Gen Z is also important is this word of trust, right? I think ultimately that authenticity has the message of authenticity has to lead to trust. That trust, if it is delivered repeatedly with every purchase occasion, every usage occasion, that trust does compound and that adds to the brand's, sort of asset. But by the way, Gen Zs are also, like we spoke about, very unforgiving. That trust can also collapse. And I think if the trust collapses, then it is just very difficult to win it back. So they are unforgiving. They are not disloyal. They are unforgiving. And I like that because then it forces brands, businesses, platforms to have a certain adherence, to adhere to a certain quality of delivery and standard.
Fantastic.
PGK, are you seeing Gen Zs in a slightly more nuanced way, or do you still think it's the same
No,
old?
I am not. No,
think
I'm
we-
joking. I think
Walked
but
right into
I
that
think
one.
I think the most interesting thing for me is that I feel like it's not so adversarial now in my mind. I think the thing that really stuck with me was both Ajay and Adarsh spoke about recognition, repositioning, and I felt, that is interesting because that's a good point because I never thought of it that way, where brands essentially are no longer like they're not doomed to remain a certain place at a certain time forever. They always can reinvent, find ways to just keep talking. And today, as he says, it's millennials, it's Gen Z, it's Gen Alpha, it's someone else. But as long as you have that understanding and pulse, you can keep repositioning, reinventing yourself. And I think that's really the large thing for me there. So, essentially, in one sentence, is Gen Z the tip of the spear? Yes, it is. But you can even make Gen Z your shield if you want. I think that's really the key thing for me. That I've come around to.
Nice.
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 Awesome. Thank you so much, Adarsh. Thank you, Ajay.
Okay. Thank you, Ajay. Thank you, Adarsh.
Thank you for listening to this episode of 2x2. This episode was produced by Udantika Kashyap and mixed by resident sound engineer Rajiv CN. If you feel there's something we've missed out in this discussion or feel some numbers or facts don't add up, you can write to us at 2x2@theken.com. And if you're listening to this episode on Apple Podcasts, please show us some love by leaving us a rating. Lastly, if you love the episode, share it with people, your friends, family, or colleagues who might find it insightful as well. We'll be back next week with an exciting discussion and a 2x2 for you to think about.